I saw lightning there up there on those hills. The windshield got spattered with a few raindrops about 20 miles back. We're 120 miles out from Salt Lake City, about 10-15 miles away from the I-15. And just look around. This is rural Utah. Is this southern Utah?
Kind of southern Utah.
What can you tell me about this area? Do you know anything about it? You've been here before?
I actually don't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know it's completely beautiful. It's, gorgeous, calming, rests the soul, invigorates you, lets you kind of find a deep sense of peace and, living in God's caress and God's presence. But I don't know much about the land.
Now, is this southern Utah or where are we?
We're in southern Utah.
Okay, is this the high desert? Do they call it the high desert? Is this desert?
I'm not being a very helpful interview candidate here. I apologize. I actually don't know. I think we're a little bit out of the desert now. But we came from Torrey, which was Capitol Reef in the desert. Now we're heading back towards Salt Lake. But I don't know my topography as well as I should.
What do you know about Torrey? It seemed like something of an artist colony.
Torrey's got a kind of little artist section there. It's a very, very lovely place, been around forever. In general, southern Utah has, lots of people kind of who grew up there. It also has kind of artists and writers. And it also has, people who work in the recovery movement. Many, many people who work in the recovery movement. It's wonderful work. It's one of the centers for the recovery movement in the world.
So I hear that the recovery industry in the United States is like an $80 billion a year industry, is that right?
That's what they say. They say there's a lot of it in southern Utah and a lot of it in Arizona around the Scottsdale area, and it's a major industry. In general, addiction in America is becoming more and more prevalent. People are more often labeling their normal life challenges as addiction. I'm not sure which one is right, but there's a huge plethora of addiction treatment centers.
So what do you think of like alcoholism? Do you think it's primarily a disease, or do you think it's primarily a lack of moral will?
I don't know the answer to that question. I just don't know. I've heard the question framed before, and I try and have a rule that I try not to talk about things that I don't know about. So I've never researched it, I've never looked into it, so I really can't say anything intelligent about it.
Like it used to be, these things like alcoholism were regarded as a failure of moral will, and now they're all called diseases.
Right. And in general, intuitively, one would think that there's some relationship between the two. That is to say, that both positions probably are partial. That alcoholism, has something to do with one's own decisions. That we're in a partial sense creators, of our ailments. And in another sense, there's genetic issues, there's hereditary issues, and those need to be looked into. And of course, there's a third position, which is that the way we act and play in the world, right, has direct impact on our bodies, on our cellular structure. So it's very, very possible, for example, that a person's internal, emotional, spiritual state will directly affect their physical body. And the fact that it has impact on the physical body doesn't mean that it's merely physical. It just means that the spirit world and the body world, right, the material world and the transmaterial world are interpenetrated. The best example would be, we know how often it is that we have stories of couples, documented now in the literature called P&I, psychoneuroimmunology, where we document stories of a couple who were together for, let's say, 50 years. One of the partners passes away, so very, very often, not long afterwards, the second partner will pass away, even though there's no documentable illness. Because what happens is there's a shift in the person's experience of meaning that depresses the immune system, right, and allows the person to pass away more readily and more easily. So the shift of a person's kind of internal sense of their own meaning, their own place and purpose in the world, which is ostensibly emotional, spiritual, existential, has direct effect, on the person's physical state. That's psychoneuroimmunology, but that intuition, goes way back, back to Descartes, who talked about the pineal gland, as that which relates the two worlds, but all the way back into a much more ancient understanding that is basically we live in a world that's whole, not a world that's desiccated. So of course the spiritual, the emotional, the physical all interpenetrate and affect each other.
Do you think that the geography where somebody lives, and I just saw lightning strikes again up there, do you think the geography where people live affects their character?
First, I need to tell you, Levy, just be careful because you know that I caused that lightning there. You know what I mean? Whenever one lightning to strike, wild things happen here. Wild. Does the geography, to be serious about your question, does the geography affect how a person? I think absolutely it does. Absolutely, where you live, the ground that you're on, and your connection to the earth, and the nature of the earth that you live on, I think has enormous effect. Both on how you develop spiritually, emotionally, even ethically. I think that's 1,000%. That's also a very strong idea in Jewish sources. We view as essential to the ethical development of the people of Israel, a profound connection to a particular place in a particular land.
Yeah, this land is very much like Israel. What kind of people do you think live here? Like, how does this land affect these people?
Levi, I don't know the answer to that question. I can't tell you. Again, I can't answer that directly because I really don't have information about it. What I can tell you is that in my experience here in Utah, in the past couple of years, I found the people to be very beautiful. I've met just tons of beautiful people who have a real sense of civility, a real sense of charity, a real sense of commitment, a real sense of family. And to use a word that people don't like, family values. A real sense of kind of ongoing revelation, a kind of cutting edge spirituality. A real sense of caring. There's more children children learning English as a second language. How do you say it properly?
English as a second language?
More children who are now learning English as a second language in Utah than any other state in the country, because Utah's developed wonderful, Salt Lake City particularly, wonderful programs for, immigrant children.
We're taking the 15 North, aren't we?
We're taking 15 North. Excellent.
So we're going to be going right.
Excellent. So I found Utah to be a hospitable, warm place, filled with a sense of, integrity, purpose, and values. I've really loved the people here, actually.